The fishing lure was still in my jacket pocket when the call came in. I remember that detail because I'd been standing in the sporting goods aisle at Bass Pro for 20 minutes, turning the thing over in my hands, trying to decide if a $7 lure was worth the argument I'd have with myself about spending money we didn't have. Evelyn was 8 months pregnant. We were watching every dollar. The lure went back on the hook. Then my phone buzzed, and the number on the screen was the Benton County Sheriff's Department, and my legs stopped working right. "Mr. Harlow." The deputy's voice was careful. Too careful. The kind of careful that means someone has practiced saying the next sentence. "This is Deputy Reyes out of Corvallis. There's been an incident involving your wife." I don't remember walking out of the store. I remember the parking lot asphalt, cracked and sun-bleached. And I remember my truck door handle being too hot to hold. And I remember thinking I needed to let it cool before I grabbed it. And then I grabbed it anyway and didn't feel a thing. "Is she alive?" "She's in surgery, sir. You need to get to Good Samaritan as fast as you can." I drove 87 miles an hour on Highway 20. I know because I watched the speedometer the whole way and thought, if I get pulled over, the deputy will just escort me there. No one pulled me over. Evelyn had gone to the farmer's market that Saturday morning the way she did every week, 8 months along, belly out to here, wearing the yellow linen shirt I'd bought her because she said it made her feel less like a blimp and more like a person. She went alone because I had a weekend drill with my reserve unit, 45 minutes east in Albany. We'd argued about it Thursday night. She wanted me to ask my CO for a pass. I said I'd already asked twice that month. She said the baby was due in 4 weeks. I said I knew that better than anyone. We went to bed without resolving it. That argument is the thing I can't stop replaying. The farmer's market sits in a gravel lot behind the old Benton County Fairgrounds. Maybe 60 vendors, 200 people on a good Saturday morning. Evelyn had her canvas tote and her list. Heirloom tomatoes. Sourdough from the Alvarez family's booth. Goat cheese if the price was right. Simple Saturday. The kind of morning you don't remember because nothing happens. What happened was a group of men affiliated with a motorcycle club called the Iron Verdict. The Iron Verdict had been working the Willamette Valley for 11 years. Extortion, drug distribution, stolen vehicle fencing. They ran protection routes from Eugene up through Salem, and local law enforcement knew them by name the way you know a recurring nightmare. Familiar, exhausting, and never fully gone. Their president, a man named Conrad, had beaten a federal racketeering charge 4 years earlier because 2 witnesses recanted within the same week. Evelyn didn't know any of that. She didn't know the man who bumped her at the tomato stand was a verdict enforcer named Dex, or that the phone he claimed she knocked out of his hand was a prop for an argument he'd been looking to start with someone weaker than him. She apologized. She said she was so sorry and she pointed to her stomach like, "Please, I'm 8 months pregnant. I didn't mean any harm." Dex said something I won't repeat. His 2 companions laughed. A vendor named Mr. Tran saw what happened next. He gave his statement to 3 different investigators. Dex shoved Evelyn into a parking barrier, and when she went down, 2 of them pulled knives. She was stabbed 9 times before anyone in that crowd moved. I learned this from a detective named Ochoa, who met me in the surgery waiting room and delivered the information in a sequence I still don't understand, because there was no sequence that would have made sense. He said the words 9 stab wounds, and my brain just stopped accepting new input for a while. I kept looking at a poster on the wall about hand-washing technique and thinking, that's wrong. The diagram shows the thumb wrong, and then I realized I was staring at a poster about hand-washing, and my wife was behind a set of double doors, and I didn't know if she was breathing. "The baby?" I heard myself ask. Ochoa looked at the floor. That was all the answer I needed, but he gave me the words anyway. Our daughter had been 31 weeks. She had a name already. We'd picked it the week before, lying in bed at 10 at night with a baby name book and a bag of Twizzlers, arguing about whether family names were too much pressure. We'd landed on a name we both loved and shook on it like a business deal and laughed about it for an hour. She had a name and a crib we'd assembled wrong twice, and a stuffed giraffe on the dresser that Evelyn's mother had sent from Phoenix. She didn't make it out of surgery. I sat in that waiting room for 6 hours. Evelyn's mother flew in from Phoenix and sat next to me and held my hand, and at some point my CO showed up in civilian clothes, which meant someone had called him, and he sat on my other side and didn't say anything, which was the right thing to do. At 4 in the afternoon, a surgeon came out and told me Evelyn was out of surgery and she was stable and I could see her in an hour. She was awake when I walked in, both eyes open, looking at the ceiling. There were tubes and monitors, and her arms were wrapped in bandaging from wrist to elbow, and she had a bruise along her jaw from when she hit the parking barrier. She turned her head when she heard me come in, and we looked at each other for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "Where's the giraffe?" I drove home and got the stuffed giraffe from the nursery and drove back. I sat in the chair beside her bed and held her hand, and we didn't talk about the baby that night. We just watched television with the volume low, and I held her hand until she fell asleep. And then I went down to the men's room and sat on the floor and fell apart completely for about 15 minutes. Then I washed my face and went back up. Detective Ochoa arrested Dex and the 2 men with him within 72 hours. The case seemed airtight. Witnesses. Surveillance from a parking lot camera 40 feet away. The victim alive to testify. I thought, this is going to be straightforward. I was wrong. I was so wrong about what straightforward looked like. The arraignment was 6 weeks later. Evelyn was still in physical therapy. She couldn't lift her left arm above shoulder height and probably wouldn't for another 2 months. I wore my service uniform because Ochoa said it sometimes helped juries perceive character. And then I sat in the gallery and watched a defense attorney I'd never seen before. Expensive suit, silver cufflinks. The posture of a man who wins. File a motion to suppress the parking lot footage on a technicality related to the camera's placement on adjacent private property. The motion was granted. I went home and sat in the driveway for an hour. I called Ochoa. The DA can still build the case on witness testimony, he told me. It's strong. How strong? He paused just long enough. 2 weeks later, Mr. Tran called to tell me he was withdrawing his statement. He sounded scared. He couldn't tell me why. He just said he was sorry, said it twice, and hung up. 2 other witnesses recanted the following week, separately, with the same law firm listed as their counsel of record. The same firm that was defending Dex and his men. I called Conrad directly then. I don't know how I got the number. I'm not going to say how I got the number. He answered on the 3rd ring, and I told him what I was and what had happened to my wife, and he laughed. Not a mean laugh. Almost a warm laugh, like I'd said something genuinely funny. "You seem like a smart guy," he said. "Smart guys figure out when a situation is over." Then he told me the name of the circuit court judge assigned to the case. He said it the way you'd mention a mutual friend. Casual. Familiar. The implication was clear and complete. I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a long time looking at nothing. I hadn't spoken to my father in 4 years. The reason wasn't dramatic enough to justify 4 years, honestly. He'd missed something important. My 3rd deployment send-off, the one where I thought there was a real chance I wasn't coming back. And I'd said things that couldn't be unsaid, and he'd said things back, and then we'd both been too stubborn to close the gap. The gap turned into 4 years. That's how those things work. My father spent 23 years in the Marine Corps, retired as a colonel. After he retired, he built a private security and logistics consulting firm from the ground up over about a decade, and somewhere in that decade it became the kind of company that gets called when defense contractors need people with very specific expertise and very specific despertise. I don't know the exact number. The number doesn't matter. What matters is that when my father made a phone call, it got answered. I sat at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and I called him. He picked up on the 2nd ring. That surprised me. It was late on the East Coast. Everett did. Just my name. His voice was the same. I told him everything. I didn't summarize. I told him about the farmer's market and the stuffed giraffe and Mr. Tran's scared voice, and Conrad laughing on the phone. I told him about the judge's name dropped like a handshake. I talked for probably 30 minutes without stopping, and he didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was silence for a few seconds. "Are you asking me to come?" he said. "Yes." Another silence. Shorter. I'll be there tomorrow. He flew into Portland and drove a rental down to Corvallis and showed up at my front door the next afternoon. He was 61 years old and looked exactly like I remembered, which meant he looked like a man who had never once in his life been uncertain about what to do next. He shook my hand, looked at me the way fathers look at sons they haven't seen in too long, and then came inside. We talked for 4 hours at my kitchen table. He asked questions I didn't expect, about the DA's office, about the specific judge, about Conrad's known associates, and the firm structure of the Iron Verdict's operations. He took notes by hand in a small leather notebook. He didn't tell me what he was planning. He asked me to trust the process. What I can tell you is what happened over the next several weeks. A federal organized crime task force that had been nominally investigating the Iron Verdict for 2 years suddenly received a significant package of documentary evidence related to the racketeering operation, financial records, communications, and what investigators later described as a comprehensive operational map of the club's distribution network through 4 counties. The source of that package was never publicly identified. Conrad was indicted on federal charges before Dex's assault case even reached trial. The circuit court judge, the one Conrad had named like a mutual friend, resigned from the bench citing personal health reasons. He resigned on a Thursday. The following Tuesday, a federal ethics review was announced. I don't know what that review found. I know that the case was reassigned. The new judge was a woman named Beaumont, who had been on the bench for 19 years and had a reputation that made the DA's office sound genuinely relieved when I called to ask about it. Dex and his 2 men went to trial on a Tuesday in November. The DA charged them with aggravated assault, attempted murder, and under Oregon's feticide statute, the intentional killing of an unborn child, at or after the point of viability. That last charge was the one I pushed for hard in 3 separate conversations with the DA's office after reading everything I could find about Oregon Revised Statute 163.15. Evelyn was 31 weeks when it happened. Feticide at or after viability is treated as homicide under Oregon law. I am not a lawyer, but I can read a statute, and I read that one about 40 times. The DA went for it. I sat in the gallery for every day of that trial. Evelyn sat next to me for 3 of them before the physical and emotional toll made it too much. Her mother came up from Phoenix and sat in her place. My CO came on the first day and the last day. A handful of guys from my reserve unit showed up unannounced on day 3, just filed into the gallery in civilian clothes and sat down behind me and didn't say anything, and I had to look at the ceiling for a while to keep myself together. Mr. Tran came back. He walked into the courtroom on the second day of testimony and sat in the witness chair and told the truth, all of it clear and steady. I don't know what changed his mind. I never asked. Some things you accept as grace and don't dissect. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. Dex was convicted on all counts, including the feticide charge. His attorney immediately announced intent to appeal, and I won't pretend that didn't land like a fist. But the conviction stood. It stood through the first appeal. It's still standing. His 2 companions took plea deals midway through the trial, each receiving 14-year sentences. Conrad, facing federal RICO charges, took a plea of his own. 42 years. He's 63. I'm not going to do the arithmetic out loud. Evelyn and I drove to the coast on the first clear Saturday after sentencing. She could lift her left arm almost all the way up by then. We found a stretch of beach south of Newport that was mostly empty and walked along the waterline without saying much. She had a thermos of tea. I had cold coffee from a gas station because I'd forgotten to make anything before we left. We stood there for a while watching the water. I want to try again, she said. I looked at her. Not yet, she said. But I want to. I want you to know that. I put my arm around her and we stood there until the wind came up and got cold, and then we walked back to the truck and sat in it with the heat on and ate the sandwiches we packed and listened to the radio. My father stayed in Corvallis for 3 weeks. He slept on our couch and made coffee every morning and was generally quieter in person than I'd remembered. Or maybe I'd just been too angry before to notice. On his last night before driving back to Portland, we sat on the back porch after Evelyn went to bed. He had a beer. I had a beer. The neighbor's dog was barking at something in the alley and then stopped. I should have been there, he said. The deployment send-off. I looked at my beer bottle. I know why I wasn't, he said. I'm not going to make excuses. I should have been there. Yeah, I said. You should have. He nodded once. We sat there for a while. You're a good husband, he said eventually. I'd been watching this week. You're a good man. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just said, thank you. And he said, you're welcome. And we finished our beers. He left the next morning at 6. He shook my hand at the door and held it a second longer than a handshake needs. I watched him pull out of the driveway, and then I went inside and stood in the hallway for a minute. Then I went upstairs and got back into bed, and Evelyn was half awake, and she said, is he gone? And I said, yeah. She reached over and took my hand without opening her eyes. The nursery door at the end of the hall is still closed most of the time. We painted it last spring. Evelyn's idea. Something lighter than what it was, and she was right. It needed to be lighter. The stuffed giraffe is still on the dresser. We talked about whether to move it and decided to leave it where it was. That felt right. I still do reserve drills in Albany once a month. My CO never once asked me to explain any of it. He just gave me time when I needed it, and expected me at drill when I said I'd be there. I was always there. My father and I talk on the phone every couple of weeks now. He calls Sunday evenings usually. We talk about regular things, sports, work, what he's dealing with at the firm. Last month he asked if we were planning to visit the East Coast anytime soon. I said we were thinking about it. We're thinking about it. We're thinking about it. Evelyn is 12 weeks along as of yesterday. We haven't told many people yet. Her mother knows. My CO knows because Evelyn ran into his wife at the grocery store, and Evelyn is constitutionally incapable of keeping a secret from someone who asks directly. We went back and forth about the giraffe, whether it should stay or go when the time comes, and we decided it stays. She should know she had a sister. That feels important to us. I still have the fishing lure in my jacket pocket. Never went back to return it. Never bought it either. It's just in there, tangled up in the lining somewhere. Sometimes I reach into my pocket and feel it, and I think about that moment in the sporting goods aisle, when the biggest problem I had was whether $7 was a reasonable thing to spend on a fishing lure. I'd give a lot to have that be the biggest problem again. But I don't know a person alive who gets to go back. You just figure out how to carry what you're carrying, and you hold the people next to you, and you keep going. That's all I know how to tell you. That's the whole of it. I've thought a lot about the word estranged. It's a strange word when you say it out loud. Estranged. Like something that used to be familiar became foreign somehow, and neither person can quite remember exactly when the distance started feeling permanent. My father and I were estranged for 4 years over something that, on paper, sounds small, a missed send-off, some words that went too far in both directions, and then two stubborn men deciding that whoever reached first was admitting something. Neither of us reached. 4 years went by, and then Evelyn was in a surgery room in Corvallis, and I was sitting in a waiting room chair, looking at a hand-washing poster, and I called him. I didn't think about the 4 years. I didn't think about who owed who an apology. I just called because he was the only person in the world I knew who could do what needed to be done. That's the thing about real crisis. It cuts through all the noise and shows you exactly who you actually trust. He came. That's the part I still sit with. He didn't negotiate. He didn't ask me to acknowledge the years. He just said he'd be there. And he was there. At my front door the next afternoon with a leather notebook and the same face I'd been avoiding for 4 years. And over the weeks that followed, I watched what happens when a man who has spent a lifetime building real capability, legal, ethical, methodical, turns that capability toward protecting someone he loves. Conrad thought he was untouchable. He had a judge, he had lawyers, he had witnesses who were scared enough to recant. He had the infrastructure of intimidation that these organizations always build, slowly, quietly, over years. Exactly because they understand that fear is more durable than violence. Fear outlasts the bruises. Fear makes witnesses go quiet on their own. But that infrastructure assumes the other side has nothing. It assumes the person across from you is working alone, that they're exhausted and grieving and navigating a system that keeps handing them closed doors. What Conrad didn't account for was a retired colonel who had spent 23 years learning how systems actually work, and another decade building the kind of relationships that sit outside the systems that can be bought. I'm not saying it was simple. I'm not saying it was clean. I'm saying that when you do real harm to people, the damage you cause has a way of compiling into something that eventually finds you. Dex and his men didn't just stab my wife. They made an enemy they didn't know they were making, and they miscalculated the resources behind that enemy by a significant margin. I think about Evelyn standing in that farmer's market with her canvas tote and her list: tomatoes, sourdough, goat cheese, and the sheer randomness of what happened to her. She did nothing. She apologized. She pointed to her stomach, and they did what they did anyway because they had always operated in an environment where consequences were optional. What I know now, on the other side of it, is that consequences are never actually optional. They're just sometimes delayed. The people who build their lives on the assumption that power insulates them from accountability eventually encounter a moment when the insulation runs out. Conrad's moment came in the form of a federal indictment. It came because he had spent years accumulating harm, and accumulated harm has mass. It weighs on people, it turns witnesses, it eventually gives investigators something solid enough to hold. Evelyn said she wants to try again. I think about that almost every day. The courage it takes to say that sentence, to choose hope inside the same body that carries the weight of what happened. That's the most honest definition of strength I know. Not the absence of fear, not certainty, just the decision to keep going anyway, made deliberately, with full knowledge of what going costs. My father calls on Sunday evenings now. We talk about regular things. Neither of us has formally apologized for the 4 years, and I think maybe we don't need to. What we did instead was show up when it mattered. I think that counts for more than the apology would have. I still have that fishing lure in my jacket pocket. I keep it there on purpose now.